So, what happens when the justice system, our understanding of mental health, and some really wild claims about technology all collide? We are about to dive into a case study all based on a collection of documents that honestly, it might just make you question everything you think you know about due process. So yeah, let's get right into it.
And right off the bat, this quote from a policy white paper it hits you. It really sets the stage for what the source material calls a Kafkaesque nightmare. And that's not an exaggeration. It's a journey through a system that feels completely broken.
All right, here's a quick look at where we're going. We'll start with the person at the center of this whole thing, a life derailed. Then we'll zoom out and put the system itself on trial and get into these really incredible allegations about technology. We'll touch on a really important legal case, a major turning point, and then we'll wrap up by looking at how we can maybe prevent something like this from happening again.
Okay, so let's start with a life derailed. This whole story revolves around a man named Shane Lozenich. And looking at the documents, it's pretty wild how something that started as a simple rental dispute, back during the COVID lockdowns in 2020, just completely spiraled into this multi-year legal nightmare.
And I mean, just look at this timeline. You can really see how one thing just cascaded into another. It starts with that dispute, then boom, multiple arrests. And from there, he gets caught in this revolving door of involuntary hospitalizations and competency evaluations. This wasn't a short-term thing either. We're talking years, until a court finally ordered his release for outpatient treatment way out in 2025.
So get this. During that whole time, how many times was his competency questioned officially? 4. 4 separate evaluations, often with different results. It's like this constant question mark was hanging over his head, this cycle of uncertainty about whether he was even capable of defending himself. It became a defining part of the whole ordeal.
So that's the personal story. Now let's pull the lens back and look at the bigger picture. We're moving on to the system on trial. And this is really an analysis of where things went so wrong.
So the white paper on this case points to a really disturbing pattern. And these weren't just, one-off mistakes. We're talking about systemic failures. Competency hearings were apparently used to just delay the case, basically trapping him in legal limbo. He was stuck in this loop of being arrested, having the case dismissed, but with nothing ever actually getting resolved. And all the while, his legal help was either inadequate or constantly changing. It's like the system itself was designed to just wear a person down.
Okay, and this is where the story takes a really sharp turn into something extraordinary. These are the invisible allegations. Throughout this entire legal battle, the individual was making these consistent and frankly alarming claims that he was being targeted by some kind of sophisticated invisible technology, a technology designed specifically for psychological torture. And he had a name for it, voice-to-skull technology, or V2K. Now, what is that? Well, it's this controversial idea that you can transmit sounds or even messages directly into a person's head, completely bypassing their ears. To be clear, the mainstream scientific community is pretty skeptical that this is being used on people. But the concept has gained a lot of traction in certain online communities, which creates a huge challenge for a legal system that's trying to figure out what's real and what isn't.
And for him, this wasn't just some abstract theory. In his telling, it was a daily reality. He described it as a tool of torture, forcing him to hear these absolutely horrific acts of violence playing out inside his own head. I mean, it is a terrifying claim, and you can just imagine how a legal system which is built on tangible physical evidence would struggle to even begin to process something like that.
Now, as far-fetched as those claims might sound to some, they don't exactly exist in a vacuum. The source material points out that right around this time, domestic terror investigations in the U.S. literally more than doubled in just 1 year. So this created this really weird tension for authorities. On one hand, you have these outlandish-sounding claims. On the other, you have a real-world push to take all novel threats seriously, so you don't accidentally overlook a new kind of harassment or attack. So that raises a huge question, right? How does our legal system even begin to handle claims about technology that you can't see or measure? Well, believe it or not, this isn't an entirely new problem. Let's take a look at a really important legal precedent that deals with this exact collision between new tech and our privacy rights. Yeah, check this out. The 2001 Supreme Court case Kylo v. United States is a really fascinating parallel. What happened was, law enforcement used a thermal imager to scan someone's house from the outside to see what was going on inside. The Supreme Court said, nope, that's a search and you need a warrant. And here's the key principle they laid out. If the government uses technology that isn't available to the general public to get information from inside your home that they couldn't otherwise get, that's a search. This was a landmark ruling for privacy in an age where technology is always advancing.
Okay, so after all these years of cycling in and out of the system, the whole narrative takes this huge turn. A new competency evaluation in early 2026 comes to a definitive and, for this case, absolutely game-changing conclusion.
And this seal you're looking at? This is it. This is the symbol of that turning point. The report it's from finally broke this years-long stalemate over his mental state, and in doing so, it completely changed the legal landscape of the case. The conclusion couldn't have been clearer. It says, at present, Mr. Lozenich has the capacity to understand the nature of the proceedings against him and to assist in his defense. I mean, wow. After years of conflicting reports, this fifth and final assessment changed everything. The entire legal machine that had been stuck in the mud for so long could finally move forward.
So this entire case, with all of its twists and turns, really serves as a powerful cautionary tale. So what do we learn from it? Well, the white paper analysis doesn't just point out all the problems. It actually proposes some really concrete ideas for reform to try and prevent this kind of thing from happening again.
So what does that path forward look like? Well, the reforms that are being proposed are pretty comprehensive. They're talking about strengthening legal safeguards, things like having stricter rules for these competency hearings and making sure people have good legal counsel. They're also calling for way more oversight and transparency, things like independent evaluations and review boards so that cases don't just fall through the cracks for years. And this one is critical. They recommend creating special units to actually investigate claims of technological abuse to make sure these kinds of allegations are taken seriously right from the start.
And all of this really leaves us with one big lingering question that gets to the very core of our modern world. When technology is moving so fast that it outpaces our justice system, who bears the burden of proof? As our lives get more and more tangled up with technologies we're only just beginning to understand, that's a question we really can't afford to ignore anymore.